John Donne, fun guy. Born 1772 as a Roman Catholic into a prominent Roman Catholic family, a distant relative of sorts to the author Sir Thomas More, author of Utopia, Catholic saint, and also martyr to Henry VIII. I believe Donne's maternal great-grandmother was More's sister. It was a prominent family. They had some money, but being Catholic in Elizabethan England was an awkward thing to be. Donne was brilliant. He studied at Oxford, Cambridge, and Lincoln's Inn, took degrees from none of them, largely because of his Catholic past, even though he was kind of arm's length with it for most of his adult life. Throughout most of his 20s, he spent his time playing the role of the young courtier, trying to find a job. He had, again, some money, but not enough to really support himself. And by being as smart as he was, as well trained and educated as he was, he didn't want to just sit around and do nothing. He had ambitions. He knew he had something to share with the world that would bring some glory and renown to him. And he was always hitting that little cap of, well, you can't quite do that. The earlier part of his youth, as a young man, he was a significant rising figure, having gone to these schools, having demonstrated his genius, having gone on some military expeditions with figures like Raleigh and Essex. He was able to get some jobs in government, and one of them was with a guy named Sir Thomas Egerton, a very powerful person in the royal government. And he was even elected, Donne was elected to a single term in Parliament, which was Queen Elizabeth's last. But he ran into a little bit of a roadblock by essentially eloping with or marrying in secret his boss's niece. Not a good move. The family objected. He spent a little time in prison for this. They were a very powerful family. But he stuck with it. He would not divorce the wife. He would not have it annulled. The couple lived out a fairly happy life together. But while doing that, Donne trashed his career hopes. Nobody would hire him. He was trained to be a high official in royal government, and suddenly he just had that black mark on his name. Couldn't get anything. Sitting around waiting for the phone to ring. There were no phones. He did make the rounds as a patronage poet, cozying up to the rich and powerful, trying to write poems that would impress them, that would flatter them, that would cause them to say, hey, that was great what you wrote about me, here's some cash. That kept him going for a while. Not in grand style, but it paid the bills. And during this time, he and his wife were a young couple. And they seemed to get along pretty well despite the conflict over their marriage. The evidence of this is they had 10 kids. A couple more if you count those who died in childbirth. So, you know, some stress in the marriage, but they found some time to be together. This time was very stressful for Donne. He wrote a defense of suicide in this period called Dianthanatos. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Thanatos means death. Diathanatos is a mind dwelling on the ultimate way out because he saw no way forward. He served another undistinguished term in Parliament around 1614. His wife died in childbirth, her 12th, in 1617. Now, throughout this period, he had been getting some opportunities dangled. James I, King James, wanted him to become an Anglican priest. James I was from a complicatedly Catholic background himself. Perhaps he saw something in Donne that would be like his stamp. And so he kept, hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you try this? Why don't you try this? Being on the radar with the King of England is not a bad place to be. Donne kept holding him off. No, no, no. No, no, no. But James, being the king, it's good to be the king, let it be known throughout the government that Donne was not to be hired for anything else. The only job he could get would be as an Anglican priest. So eventually he caved. Okay, I'll be a priest. And he was brought in a succession of rather rapidly advanced roles, graduating ultimately to the role of Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, where he preached to London's elite for about 10 years before he died. St. Paul's Cathedral brochures. Pretty cool. There's a statue of him there where during the fire of London that essentially leveled London in, 1666, one thing that survived was a statue of Donne. And you go there now and it's sitting there right up against the wall, and it's neat, and you could actually look at his toes have some discolored. It's burnt from this fire from hundreds of years ago. And it's just neat. The poetry that he was producing throughout his life was pretty much all published after that life ended. That didn't mean that he was just scratching it away in notebooks and hiding them. He had an active career for a long time, particularly when he was young and hanging out with all the ambitious young men of his day in a kind of closed circle of friends trading poems, essentially showing off, as groups of young men tend to do. Hey, I can write this line that's really maybe a little dirty, maybe a little cocky, maybe a little dangerous. Let me see what I can do. And these people would trade this around. And very often, the writing that they were producing would include, as any little group has, inside jokes, references, jargon, little things that one or two people, or maybe a dozen at most, will understand. But you're hiding it in there. And then everybody in that group can go, wow, that's cool. And this was helping him train, because then he is writing on two levels in that, because he is writing to, in a way, a broader audience, even if he's not publishing just yet, but also to these individual people. So you get used to that split focus as an artist, which you got to figure he had to practice quite a lot. As a sort of Catholic who was working his way over towards Protestant belief, he's used to those two different aspects of spirituality. As an insider who was so well set up, who was then suddenly outside trying to get back in, he's very conscious of that dynamic as well. As somebody who was raised in a prominent family with some money, he had to be able to distinguish between his socioeconomic status, those beneath him, and those who seemed to be impenetrably above him. So all of these divisions, all of these levels, all of these voices were within his repertoire. And you can see this in pretty much everything he wrote. The hallmarks of his poetry are somewhat unconventional approaches. He was a big fan of what comes to be known as the metaphysical conceit, which is a linking together of two images or ideas that don't really go together, and make you kind of scratch your head and go, what was that? But by playing with those discordant notes, you become aware of what he is doing in a very fresh way. The smoothness of Renaissance verse up until him was coming under some criticism, where smoothness can become very bland, very tired. The Petrarchan model of poetry was just too worn out by the time Donne came along. And it took people saying, well, I'm going to do something outrageous within it, and that will give it a little B12 shot. Inject some energy into it that will bring out new ideas or new sensations, because I don't want to be just stuck doing the same old, same old. But that itself has a kind of historical basis. When you think about the Renaissance, also known, after all, as the early modern age, so much of that time, the humanist project, was in examining old ideas, taking them up one at a time and testing them, shaking them, poking them, prodding them, seeing if they are of any use any longer, or are they just tired out husks. That is the old and the new brought together, a metaphysical conceit. And how much you accept that, how much you decide to conserve, and how much you decide to reject, that is left up to the individual, the reader himself, the small group, perhaps, that he is specifically speaking to, and that can get a lot of the nuances and the inside references, or the outside broader public, whom he always basically knew was his audience, even if they never saw it. The writing he leaves us bears all this out. The experimentation, the unconventionality, the mismatched elements within it that call attention to themselves and get you thinking about old ideas in very new ways.